Welcome to IdeaGen TV. Today we're ecstatic to have with us Dr. Michael Manyak, Global Medical Director for GlaxoSmithKline. Michael, welcome.
Hi, George. It's good to see you again. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
You know, Michael, I've been awestruck over the years. We're friends and colleagues, and it's just amazing to have seen your leadership on so many different levels. And this interview, I hope, will uncover for our global audience what I'm referring to. Can we start by relaying back to all of those across the world that are watching this interview a little bit about yourself, as well as your role and responsibilities as medical director, global medical director for GlaxoSmithKline?
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. I've lived long enough that I've had some a fair amount of experiences, so I'll just try to hit the highlights here for you. Basically, I'm a urologist, but I'm also an explorer, an author, and a corporate medical executive. So I wear several hats and have had different experiences in those areas. I spent 16 years in academia at George Washington University, 10 of those as the chair of the Department of Urology. And I remain an adjunct professor of urology and engineering at GW. I also was a professor of microbiology, immunology, and tropical medicine for 10 years at GW also. So this ties into the corona stuff that we're going to talk about in a little while. Some of the other things I've done I think are maybe of interest. I was the former chief medical officer for Triple Canopy, which is a large international high-threat, high-risk security firm. And during that time, think of Blackwater. That was their major competitor, was Triple Canopy. And during that time, we have 7,000 special forces deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan and southern Israel. And I had 62 medical personnel reporting to me from the war zones. And so it was a variety of things that you ran into, starting with breaking an ankle playing touch football all the way to mortar attacks where people got killed and seriously injured. I also am currently the chief medical advisor for crisis response for multiple Fortune 500 companies and for the Washington, D.C. Board of Trade. So we've been active with the coronavirus situation, of course. I'm a distinguished Eagle Scout and a vice president for the National Eagle Scout Association, and I direct the National Eagle Scout Association World Explorer program. This is a program that I created and direct currently that sends nationally selected Eagle Scouts on remote expeditions. So I've had long interest in exploration and expedition medicine. I've been on many remote expeditions, including to the Titanic, down in the last unexplored jungle in Africa with National Geographic, to Mongolia twice, once for the first scientific dive in Mongolia on the Siberian border, and then most recently to evaluate the newly discovered, highly endangered wild camel. It's the third camel species in the world. It has 2 humps, and it's only in a small area in the Gobi Desert. I've also been the first in a small group to evaluate a brand new finding of early human footprints in Tanzania, which turned out to be about 20,000 years old. So they're Homo sapiens. I've been deep in the Amazon for biodiversity, in the both marine and terrestrial. I've been on Antarctica on an icebreaker. I've been in the deepest canyon in the world in Peru. So I've been a lot of places like that, and I do expedition medicine. Now, as far as GSK is concerned, where I've worked for the last 10 years, I've been involved with a variety of things there. I'm a urologist, so I'm in the urology franchise there. And I've been involved with business development, strategic planning for FDA approval of products, intellectual property development, protocol construction, clinical trials, and development of educational materials. So there are a lot of hats we wear in those types of positions, and I've done that.
Well, Michael, I guess the question becomes, what haven't you done? You've worked, what an incredible career. And so how are you and your team, and how have you and your team used innovation to help you work towards achieving the global goals, for example, such as good health and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've done for a long time. I did a fellowship at the National Cancer Institute and was involved with a brand new type of imaging agent for both prostate and bladder cancer. And then I took that with me to GW and developed that, published the results, and it's a very innovative approach to the management of those problems. We did a lot of things. I was the head of technology for the American Urological Association, so I brought new technology into GW, including I was the first person to do a laparoscopic procedure for urology, and I also introduced robotic surgery to GW. So, all throughout my medical career, we were involved with innovation. Now, GSK, we've been innovative as well, and we have one product there that is a very large product, and it's used to treat urinary symptoms, primarily in men. And this is we had to develop this drug, do the clinical trials, and then do publications, and then educate the community of physicians and also the public. So during this time, we also used a very novel drug disease modeling system to simulate clinical trials, because sometimes it's difficult to get a lot of patients into these trials. You need statistically significant numbers. So this drug disease model system is very innovative, and it actually has been able to replace the recruitment of actual patients, because it simulates the patient situation. So innovation has been a very important part of my life, basically, particularly in the academic world, but also in the corporate world as well.
Well, Michael, it's just remarkable to hear all of the innovation that you've worked on and that you're working on currently. And just a few short months ago, you and I were having a conversation. I think it was around January, and to think that a few short months later, we would be in the midst of a global pandemic, and that the entire world, for perhaps the very first time in human history, is facing the same exact thing with a hidden enemy that literally shut down the entire planet, shut down the planet. And so as you work so closely on this global pandemic, is there anything about the disease that you could share with our audience that you might know about?
Yeah, let me first say that as in my work with these Fortune 500 companies, there's one in particular, Accenture, that I've worked with since 2012 as their chief medical advisor for crisis response. And their concern was a disease like this. What if we have a pandemic? How are we going to manage that from a business standpoint? That's huge. They have 500,000 employees, so that's a real issue for business continuity. So we were already on board. I've been predicting, along with my colleagues, that there was going to be a pandemic sometime, because we've had some in the past and we were ripe to have another one. We've had 3 other ones this century before the coronavirus, and that includes, the Spanish flu of 1918, the H1N1 flu, and then the original SARS-1, which were all pandemic type of events. So this new thing, we keep preaching, we got to be ready. We have to be facile to get information and to distribute it and to educate ourselves about what's going on. So in that light, I'm just going to say a few things about this, that there's much information about, misinformation about this disease is going on all the time. You see it on TV, you read it in the papers, you don't know what to believe, and it's confusing to physicians as well. And so, you have to sort this out. And I think there are a couple of points I just want to make. One, I think we need a 3-pronged approach to approach this type of a problem. That includes detection, a vaccine, and treatment. Okay, so for early detection, we need biosurveillance, and there are ways to do that. We did a pilot trial with this in the Philippines back about 4 or 5 years ago. It was very interesting. We need more of that stuff available so that we can detect things early as they come out. China would not have been able to get away with this if we had more biosurveillance. We also need contact tracing. That's a very important piece to head off the risk of spreading this throughout the population. Now, as far as the vaccine is concerned, you hear a lot about that. We may have vaccines, and probably will. There may be multiple vaccines. But what makes it tricky is the fact that these viruses mutate rapidly, so that you may create a target for your vaccine that may change by the time you've released it to the public. So you got to stay tuned on these things, and we'll likely have more than one vaccine. We'll probably have to have a vaccine every year, because this will probably be like the seasonal flu that we have, where you have to change something each year to make the vaccine available. The third thing is treatment. We need some treatment. And what nobody's really talking about is that this virus needs two receptors in the human body to enter into the cell. And that is, you've probably heard about ACE2 receptors. Now, they're present in the brain, the gastrointestinal tract, the nasopharyngeal area, and widely expressed in the lungs. And it's also highly expressed in the testes. That may account for why more males than females are getting coronavirus. Now, the thing is that nobody talks about is that it needs a second receptor to enter the cell. And that's got a long name, so I won't go into that. It's called TMPRSS2. But we've been studying that for its use in prostate cancer for about 15 years. So now that we found that that's always necessary there, we know something about that receptor, and we can block both of these receptors. And so there are 6 clinical trials ongoing right now that are looking at variations of ways to block those methods. And I just read about one that came out, it was announced yesterday, another antibody that may block replication of these viruses. So we're going to have some kind of treatment. So it's going to be a 3-pronged attack. Now, the other thing we need to watch out about is for our water supply. You know, it's in the gastrointestinal tract. So about 25% of people have diarrhea. So that's going to get into the water supply. And the question is, what is that doing? Is that a way of spreading the disease? And that is not determined yet. So it may be another way that this is getting into our systems. Importantly, for that particular aspect is the fact that this is also dangerous to endangered species. Nobody's talking about that. There are about 400 mammalian species that have been tested to show that they have the receptors for this disease. And so this has 2 things to think about. One, it could be an intermediate host that keeps the virus in the community. Secondly, all the endangered species that we have are at risk if they have these receptors, which many of them do, including some of the very rare whales and things like that. So this is another aspect that the public doesn't know much about. So my point is, I think that what we need to evaluate all this information, we need a national clearinghouse to evaluate them and provide a rapid response, something that is not connected to politics. Well, therefore, I'm not sure it should be housed in the WHO or the FDA or anything like that, but it needs to be separate itself. And you could have an advisory board, a relatively small one, a core group, relatively small, with key backgrounds, such as what we did for the Woodrow Wilson Institute pandemic forum last week. It was a great forum on the geopolitical risk and global resilience component, which fits right into this whole story here. And this is, if you could also have an advisory board that advises them from key sectors from the community, such as energy and security and IT and pharmaceuticals and the military. That way, we could rapidly assess information and disseminate that information, and educate people, including the physicians and our government. So I think those are some of the things to think about with this coronavirus. We'll continue to learn. We're not done with it yet. Like one of my friends likes to say, we're in the 4th inning of a 9-inning game, and that's probably correct. So stay tuned. We're going to learn more, but I think we've got some approaches that are going to help us in the near future.
Well, Michael, it's, this background, this perspective is so, and these insights are so incredible for our global audience to really hear, because they're not, there's many people that don't have the ability to see beyond corners, and you do. And you're seeing things that perhaps many of us do not before they're happening. So you're describing what is, I like the term, a dynamic resiliency that's so necessary to be prepared for all of these types of, eventualities, if you may. This would be in the eventuality category. You recently authored an article for Cognizant on continued threats from emerging diseases. which is obviously apropos for a lot of things we're talking about today. And can you expand on this for our global audience?
Yeah, sure, George. Well, I mentioned the fact that we've had, this is the fourth pandemic we've had in this past century. You know, the Spanish flu of 1918, SARS in 2003, H1N1 swine flu in 2009. Now, those didn't get to be quite pandemic, but they were on the verge of that, and they would have been, but they were able to be controlled. Now, I think the thing that we still have to worry about is exactly what we were talking about before, that is one of those bad flus being able to easily acquire the ability to get into the human body, and such as through the respiratory tract or through the nasal pharynx, you know, your nose and gastrointestinal tract. If they do that, you know, and something like the original SARS acquires that ability, then we've got a real disaster on our hands. And I think that's the thing that scares these companies and scares people, and it should, because we have about a 0.3% case fatality rate for coronavirus. But if you get something like the original SARS was 11%, you kill millions and millions of people. And so we need to be ready to address those kinds of things as they come up. I think that's very important. The other thing is we're in an arms race with antimicrobial resistance to antibiotics. And so we have an increase in, for example, in extremely drug-resistant TB, which is a very bad disease, very hard to treat, and it's on the rise. It's still relatively small, but it's rising, and it continues to rise. It's coming out of places like Russia and China. And then there's MRSA, which many people have heard about. That's methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, and that's a bad disease. We're trying to fight that stuff too. And then there are other diseases like that are getting this resistance to antibiotics, and we have to be careful about how we use antibiotics so we don't develop resistance, but we also have to develop more antibiotics and more classes of antibiotics. So that's an ongoing arms race that we have with the biological community. Then there are other things like malaria. It still kills millions of people annually. We don't have, and it is very adaptive and quickly develops resistance to almost everything that's been developed to treat it. So we still got our hands full with infectious disease.
And that, again, is incredible perspective. And it sounds like there's still work to be done based on what I'm hearing. And but there are ways to be prepared, to be resilient, right? I mean, if we have, the tools that you suggested in place, perhaps we can preempt or prevent a lot of these calamities from having the devastating effect like we've just seen. And so we've experienced a pandemic like this in the past. There's been HIV/AIDS, there's been SARS, there's been H1N1, MERS, Ebola, and now, of course, COVID-19. What is next, Michael, and how can we prepare globally for this?
Well, I just covered that in our previous question. Really, the one that scares me is one of those bad flus for either like bird flu or swine flu, which kill people. If they're not easy to get infected with right now, but if they change and they mutate such that they have the ability to easily attach to the respiratory mucosa or to the back of your nasal pharynx, then you're going to have something that's very dangerous that it can easily attach to humans. So that's the thing that scares me, and that's the thing that we have to be vigilant about. That's why it's really important to prepare to have systems in place for, as I said, surveillance and biosurveillance, and then rapid response. So we need communications. We need honesty among people involved with this, and we need to react rapidly and efficiently. There's a very thin line between overreacting and underreacting with these kinds of things. So from a corporate standpoint, let's take a look at that, because it has a huge economic impact, obviously. If you pull the trigger too soon and you're not really sure that you have a pandemic type situation, then you've shut down businesses like we've seen in the US here and other places of the globe, and you do it prematurely, and there's a huge price to pay when maybe that trigger shouldn't have been pulled. On the other hand, if we wait too long, then you see what we have. This is what we had developed with this pandemic. Fortunately, this doesn't kill people as much as some of the other bad bugs out there. but you can see the devastation it's created. So we need to be ready to act. We need be ready to assess the information we get, and then act on it.
Absolutely. And being prepared, Michael, I think is the critical piece, and we'll dig more into that question as we proceed. And so as we look at this outbreak, this global pandemic, this situation, what sort of setbacks have you seen towards achieving Goal 9 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals? And what do you think is the best strategy to get back on track?
Well, I think we learned something, and we're continuing to learn something from this pandemic, and that is that we need a more rapid response, and we need communication. You can see what happened when China didn't communicate with us. That was devastating for the world. They should be held accountable for that, and we need coordination of response. And so I think one of the best things that our government did really was they rapidly mobilized the federal and private sectors to work together and coordinate. We're going to have a vaccine within about 7 months of the time this thing came out. That's incredible. The people at GlaxoSmithKline, which is a very big vaccine company that I work for, tell me that the experts there tell me it takes about 9 months to develop a vaccine from scratch when you first find something. So we're ahead of the game, actually. And despite the criticisms from some sectors, I think they've done a pretty good job of trying to coordinate everything to get that kind of a vaccine available for us. So stay tuned, but we can improve, certainly. But that's one positive thing I think that people don't highlight enough.
Exactly. And, I guess a follow-up to that is that we saw the major pharma CEOs coming out with a pledge recently. Everyone from Johnson & Johnson to the other key players, Pfizer, I believe, in this race to get one or more vaccines to market to address this scourge, which is this global pandemic. Do you see, and this is sort of an ad lib, follow-up to what you just mentioned, but do you see a problem with folks being hesitant to take the vaccine once it's out? And how do you assure the American people that, and people across the world really, that the vaccine will be safe? I mean, the pharma CEOs made that pledge. Do you feel like that will be an issue in any way?
Well, it is, George, because they've taken surveys of the population, and basically there's a surprisingly high percentage of people that said they won't take a vaccine. It was, I believe, 35%, and maybe as high as 50% said they will not take the vaccine. I think that's absolutely insane. I would definitely take the vaccine. And part of this is a disinformation campaign about vaccines in general. And secondly, also in the past, there have been mistakes made with vaccines. So it's a combination of things, and people aren't as trusting as they should be. But I think in today's world, these things need to be tested, and they will be tested. That's why we don't have one yet, because you have to really test it in a lot of people and then see that it truly is safe. There will be some small amount of side effects that occur, but the great benefit will outweigh the risk for these types of things. So, I'm sorry to see that people are saying they're not going to take the vaccine. I think that's a truly a bad mistake.
Well, and hopefully that, with leaders and experts like yourself out there, talking about the facts and the science, that we'll have the best possible product on market, and we'll also have the ability to provide, people across the planet with access to a vaccine that they know, that they feel comfortable with, that is safe. And I think that's the minimum. And I think that's what we saw in the CEOs that came together, making the pledge for a safe vaccine. So I think that goes a long way. Shifting a bit to you. So the world is changing rapidly. And I'd like to zero in on Dr. Michael Manyak. What would you say has been one of the most rewarding moments for you as we all battle through this situation? And what made it so rewarding?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that I've really enjoyed, if you can enjoy something in the midst of a pandemic, is the fact that I've been able to work with really bright colleagues who have a very common interest for diagnosis and treatment of this disease. And that is rewarding as a physician and a scientist. That's exactly what you try to do. I really see that. There's a great desire on the part of a lot of different sectors and different intelligent people to try to get this thing under control. So I see that desire to improve coordination as well. You know, one of the other rewarding things is that, you know, people started to present with these different presentations, such as the loss of smell and the loss and the COVID toes, where you had these red splotches on your lower extremities. And you know, nobody was putting it together. I almost wrote a letter to the Wall Street Journal to say, this is a vascular phenomenon. Those are all small vessels, end vessels, and they're getting plugged. And it turns out that that's exactly what's happening. So this is a vascular disease that it has its big effect, you know, by creating clots in small vessels. So that was, to me, was a revelation and a very interesting phenomenon about this whole disease process. Finally, the other people did put it together, and now we understand that that's what's going on.
Well, amongst the many careers and opportunities and leadership that you have exemplified and led through, one is that of author. And I highly recommend to our global audience that they order your book, Lizard Bites and Street Riots. You used a very unique 5 things you must take on travel. Very interesting, simple, but yet profound, which is really the definition of Dr. Michael Manyak's leadership. Can you explain to our audience what the 5 things are that you came up with and how they can save you while traveling?
Sure, George. First of all, the book was published, you know, a few years ago. I'm sorry if I can't put it right on the screen here very well, but it's small, it's compact, and it covers about 100 different scenarios for people who are traveling with different problems, such as chest pain or abdominal pain, or you get a sliver, or if you get some kind of infection. So the feedback has been very good about this book being useful for people to travel. And so when we launched that book back in 2015, we came up with the idea to, you know, what I was asked, what do you take? What are the things you really need to take when you go somewhere? So that's where we came up with this, the 5 things you must take on travel. Now, one is a flashlight, a good, I don't mean a pen light, something better than that, but not a tactical flashlight necessarily, not something big. These need to be small and be able to travel with you. I also recommend duct tape. You can use that for so many things, including for blisters or for patching a hole in your bag, a variety of things. The third thing is very important, I think, is a rubber doorstop, particularly for women that travel. You know, you're always curious about the security in the hotel you're in. You might be in a third world country, and things are a little shaky sometimes. So you've got people may issue another key, or that flimsy chain across the door doesn't make you feel very safe. You put a doorstop under your door, nobody can get into your room. So it's a source of comfort. It's cheap and easy to take with you. The fourth thing that I always like to take is Imodium for diarrhea. The worst thing in the world is to be stuck somewhere in a strange place and have a bout of gastroenteritis causing diarrhea. So if you carry some Imodium with you, you'll be able to at least get it settled down until you can get proper treatment through medical services. And the fifth thing is, now we're all concerned about sanitization. So you have to have a little package of things that are very important to help protect you. One is a mask. We know about masks. The second thing would be a small bottle of hand sanitizer. That's shown to be very good to prevent things. The third thing that I like to talk about is something that causes sanitization of your nose. This is a small ampule. It's made by a company called Nosen, and it's got an alcohol-based compound and some other proprietary components. But when you squeeze the tip here, break that, and it mixes together, then you take that piece like this, and you swab it inside your nose, both nostrils, and it kills a huge amount of bacteria and viruses. Now, we're not allowed to say, you know, that it's effective against coronavirus, but they've certainly killed it in the lab with this system. And it is something that I take with me on travel all the time. That helps a lot. It lasts for about 15 hours. So you can probably do it once a day, but no, you don't have to do it more than twice a day, in the morning and evening. And you're going to be protected from a site that people don't think about that contains a lot of organisms that end up causing infections, and that's the nose. So very interesting. So you got 5 things there, and you can put them in a little bag, and you've got room to stick that right in your travel kit or your briefcase, and you've got the 5 things that you must take on travel.
Dr. Michael Manyak, 5 things you must take when traveling to save your life. Your book, Lizard Bites and Street Riots, one of the best books I've ever had the opportunity to read. And knowing you and having, your expertise embedded in that book is priceless. And so as we approach our last question, I'd like to ask you, what is your post-summit ask for our global audience as we continue to change the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the most important thing is that we need to become involved. If it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to evoke change. But it all starts with the individual and the commitment of that individual. So I think it's very important that we try to do what we can individually, and that will translate into a broader perspective. And I think the second thing that I think is important to remember, a lot of things are negative these days. I think we need to remain optimistic about our fellow man. I think most people really want to do the right thing and to help other people. And I think that we need to keep that in mind.
The final word, Dr. Michael Manyak, Global Medical Director, GSK. Thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for your incredible insights. And thank you for all you're doing to change the world.
Thank you very much for having me on, George. I appreciate it very much.